Hi, I'm Katie Shane and welcoming you to Combining Two Worlds, helping ELLs find their voice in writing. I currently teach 9th through 12th graders at John Hanley High School in Winchester, Virginia. I'm also a teacher consultant for Shenandoah Valley Writing Project and hope you find some interesting things to use in your classroom as soon as you get back to school. Or if you're already in it, I hope you're working it out well. This was supposed to be an in-person, and there's a lot of interacting activities that we're going to do. So I'm going to encourage you to stop the video and go into the materials and open. I've put the slideshow in there as well, so the links you can get to from there, but also all the documents you need for the 3 activities are there as well. So please feel free to use those in any way that will help you with your lessons. So before we begin, we are going to do what's called a quick write. Activity 1, I would like you to write a short note to a friend or to a family relative about a real or an imaginary vacation you've had. I'd like you to write in a second language. So if you are not a native Spanish speaker, I've given you some tools to use for Spanish to write your note in to your friend about this real or imaginary vacation. On the slide, you'll see some sentence frames that you can use to begin with. And also there are links into the materials page that you can reference. Here's one that just has a huge vocabulary list of things that you might do on vacation or during your time away. Please feel free to use those as you write. I'm going to stop the video for about 5 minutes and give you time to do that. Remember, it can be real or imaginary, and it doesn't have to be long. Think of it like a postcard. When you're done with that, what I want you to do is read it aloud. And then I want you to take the time to write the same idea, same note, but now in your L1, in your first language, whether that be Spanish or a different language, or whether that be English. I want you to take the time to do both because we're going to reflect on those in the next few slides. So at this time, if you would stop the video and take time to do that first activity. Now that you are finished with your activity, I want you to look back over both writings. And I want you, before we move on, to jot 2 or 3 things that you notice about the one you wrote in your second language and the second one you wrote in your native language. Which one is a truer expression of yourself? If we were in my classroom, I'd ask my students to put a star beside the one that they thought was more them, and which one was harder, or they'd leave without the star. So do that before we move on. And jot just a few ideas. They don't have to be complete sentences, just some thoughts. And now we're going to go into presentation mode. And let me get that. For a while, I don't have to show you the other tabs on my screen, so you can follow along this way. All right, so we're going to talk about what is discourse. Discourse is a fancy word for communication, whether we do it through writing or speaking or listening, some type of discussion. Another theorist would call it rhetoric, effective communication. Notice the word effective, though. So there were studies done in the 80s by Robert Kaplan. And if you've never studied it, I hadn't taken all my undergrad degree until I was taking extra classes to work with my English language learners at both the middle school where I was at the time and the high school. In my reading specialist time, I was trying to figure out how to help those kids. So I took an ESOL class, and I discovered all of this theory about cultural thought and how different cultures have different ways of communicating or discourse. So Kaplan stated that the teaching of reading and composition to foreign students does differ from the teaching of reading and composition to American students. And those cultural differences in the nature of how they have their discourse supply the key to that difference in how we have to change our teaching approach. So Kaplan created 5 patterns from his research, and what you'll see here are those 5 patterns. Very simplistic idea, but the visual was what was important, and that's why I share it with you now. In the American tradition, if you think about what we try to teach students from very early on, is that beginning, middle, and end, that general storyline that starts and ends, and it has a direct route to do that. But one of the things that Kaplan noticed is that other cultures don't do it, have that. They don't tell their narratives in that way. They don't tell their stories. They don't hold their conversations in that pattern. In a Romance language like Hispanic languages, they tend to digress and then come back and digress a different way and then digress a different way. And eventually they get to the point, but there's a lot of extra parts to their story. In an Arabic, which I've had the luxury of having some students who that's their native language, they tend to direct a conversation to one thing, backtrack and direct it back to that thing again, and then go and again. So they come to the point 3 different times, but they kind of go in a different direction. Your Asian cultures tend to have that cyclical. If you think about anything, if you had to read anything by Confucius, I'm sure you've seen that wisdom of the ages and everything kind of ties into each other. But this is just a way to think about visually how a narrative is formed and why, if you have students, you've struggled with understanding their writing and why they're so, it's not that beginning, middle, end that we're trying to teach, which in some ways, according to this, is very boring, to be quite honest, but it is the way that we need to have them write. But that doesn't mean we have to have them write that way all the time. They have to write that way for certain things, like the tests and stuff, but the majority of our writing should honor their cultures. So how does that impact instruction? This is my classroom. So Dan-Ling Fu, her book is in my references, but if you have a lot of students who are second language learners, I would highly recommend her writing and her book. It's not a difficult read. It's very short and direct. She states that the most challenging part of teaching writing is showing students how we think, to find appropriate topics, to focus, to organize ideas, to select the right details, to elaborate, and then to see the wonder in seemingly insignificant things. I'm sure if you heard the keynote speaker today, Carol Salva believes, we write together. We do that co-writing to honor those little, things that we don't think are important, but also to teach them how to think aloud while we write. So if we look at both this and Kaplan's idea, how do those affect instruction? Jot down some thoughts. Writing is the hardest thing. I find more teachers avoidant of teaching it who are in different grades than those of us who enjoy it, but it is frustrating. It is hard to teach. There is no one right way, and it is voice and it is discourse and the power of enjoyment. So we need to find that for our students and help them find that for themselves. So just as an example, Fu had 2 pieces were written by a 7th grade English language learner during their first year in an American school. The first one we're going to look at was 2 months into the school year. This student was Chinese in their background. And the next one we're going to look at is a conclusion paragraph essay, but one that he wrote in his native language first. And I want you to look at the differences in what they were able to produce. So this is the journal entry 2 months in. If you notice right away, as you just glance at it, you'll see lots of English words. Obviously, he has the general structure of English sentences coming from an Asian background. The vocabulary is extremely different. The alphabet's different, all of those things. But he wrote, "This morning, mom said, go to the uncle home, eat lunch. I am very happy because I like uncle home. Morning, I watch news, TV. Yesterday, I am very happy. Yesterday, I third teacher absent. The yesterday is no homework." So we get a gist of what they're saying, but let's look at the second one. So this is one he wrote in his native language first. That was a very unforgettable day for me. I felt sad, homesick, and lost for all I had in China. I saw the magnificent view of America, but I realized my life in this land had nothing to do with those magnificent lights, skylight buildings, endless running cars, and suspended bridges. I went through all kinds of feelings and thoughts in one day, but I could never forget the American lights. Now, as we look at this, think about your own example. How are those two very similar to what you noticed about your own? He wrote in his language, his first language, and he has voice and he has feeling and he has depth. Whereas in the first journal writing, he's really just regurgitating vocabulary to get something on the paper. He's not, it's not him. It's not an expression of him. And if you notice that in your own, that's very true about all of us. When we have our own comfort zone, our own voice, our writing becomes something bigger than ourselves and it expresses our inner emotions. So some facts generally about English language learners. On average, we all know if you have them in your classroom, it can take up to 3 years to become proficient at basic communication. That's not writing in a second language, and 7 for academic language. Yet most classrooms, think about this, they wait on teaching writing skills until a certain level of proficiency in their language 2 is formed. So usually that 2 or 3 is where they really start working when they get to that level of writing. So also writing skills are used most often, if you think about it, in painful grammar practice or to retell information without meaning and without purpose, which was very similar to what we saw in the first journal entry. But the National Assessment of Educational Process reports that poor reading and poor writing performance of English language learners in the middle grades persists through high school. So basically, this means that we cannot wait until they're proficient in a language for them to learn writing. So there are 4 general types of English language learners. You have your strong L1, literate in their native language. That is and they move very quickly. You have lack of strong education, interrupted. And if you are like me in a high school, this is the majority of students I see. They come in at age 15, 16. We have to have a serious conversation about what it's going to take to graduate high school. We often find there's been a huge gap of instruction. So they have lots of holes. And even if they didn't have holes and they went K6, the education is vastly different in different parts of the world. So what they have may be very different than what a traditional student who had been through that many years in American culture would have, even those students who struggle. So they've had that lack of interrupted. Okay, 20% of all high school ELLs fall in this, and 12% of all middle school have missed 2 or more years. That's kind of frightening if you think about what they're asked to do when they walk through that door. So then we have long-term ELLs. That means they've been 6 years or more in the program, and they're proficient orally, and they can trick a good teacher, but not in writing or academic reading. And then we have the mainstreamed, your monitor students. So I want to show you the kind of flow of how that goes. So usually a student who comes in and is strong and literate in their first language will move quickly into the mainstream. They'll jump to that monitored status fairly quickly because they have that basis of education. But those students who come in with interrupted education will quickly or often move to those long-term ELLs because there's so many things within that. Again, another reason for us to not wait on writing instruction because they need to be able to express their thoughts and their feelings and their emotions. So Fu has 4 stages of writing development that is different from TESOL standards and different from the Valdez model, if you're familiar with that. It doesn't start at the 0 stage. It's rather based on what languages they're strong in. So you have your first language. And Fu, through these, I'm going to talk just briefly about them and show you some examples. But she advocates for students to write every day in every subject. To begin with, using their L1 is needed. And because lack of practice in writing causes them to stagnate in both their native language and their L2. Writing, we know, the practice of putting, paper to print, pen to ink to paper, and going through the process creates that learning model. It refocuses your brain. There's all kinds of brain study on that I'm not going to go into right now. You'll probably be thankful for that. But a first language writer would do something like this. And I want you to notice some things. There's November, so they're using some things that we're giving them. They're putting down what type, their initials, so we know they're kind of starting their name. But this person is truly still just writing. But while everyone else is writing, they're writing too. And this could easily be typed and translated so the teacher could read it. but the student has a voice. And that's the important part. The student is partaking in the activity and has a thought to say. And you can use this as the week goes on. You could start on Monday. They could work on translating parts of it, and it could be a practice read, and they could share that with the class. But they're getting ideas. As you heard Carol Salva say, you'll hear them say that writing together to co-create text, they can put their ideas down in their native language first, and then work with a partner or work together to share that with the group. So then you have code switching or mixed languages. And that looks much more like this. This student is from the Dominican Republic. And if you look through, you'll see the English words are underlined because they've learned those words so far, but they're switching back and forth. And that is perfectly fine. That's what we want them to do because they're getting their voice in there. If they wrote this like that young student 2 months in and only could write in English, you would get something like we saw before. But now that they're code switching, and they're allowed to code switch, their voice is in there. Their feelings, I want, I have, I hope, I need help with, I talk, these words that they might not have in English yet, they can easily express in their native language. Interlanguage is the next level, and that is where you're using more English, but when you run out of the English, you go back to your native language. So you'll see most of the first paragraph is all in English that they have here, but then they go on to the next one, I don't remember, and then you'll see in there every so often is interspersed is some of their L1, their Chinese language, and that is absolutely wonderful. That's what we want. Look how much bigger, look how many more words they have, and they've honored themselves and honored what they're learning at the same time. And then last is close to standard, but you'll notice the syntax is still not quite what a native speaker would use. They have commas. That's great because they've been modeling them in class and things, not necessarily because they're learning them, but they know their purpose. If you read it aloud, you'll see their pauses. And so they've understood that means I need to stop. I'm just taking this little break. But the syntax is a little off. It's not completely a native speaker, but look how rich in voice it is. I have the book, The Place for Me, it's funny story, and it keeps going. And the more we can build their voice, the more they feel comfortable in sharing. So if writing reflects who and what writers are, then English language learners' native language, their voice and their expression, whether will either visibly appear in that mixed language or be blended, that inner language in writing. So we have to honor their voice. That's the point of this. And I'm going to give you three specific types of activities with poetry to give them that opportunity to do so in a way while still learning and working with English. So we have to honor their voice. ELLs, think about them in the back of the room. They hide, they shy away from engaging in the classroom unless it's full of the people like themselves. Allow code switching and inner language honors their voice and helps them build a comfort level in your class. Code switching is used for a borrowing strategy. It's a filler, convenience and accuracy, and for cultural expression. It's not a scapegoat. It's not a weakness. It's how we think. When we first learn a language, we think of that language in whatever way we've learned it. So we need to allow them to use that in their class. Interlanguage is not first language interference, but it's a natural pattern that occurs. So here are some of my thoughts from my students. English 3 in Winchester is English 11, and in the state of Virginia, that is the testing year. Unfortunately, our school does semesters, so they come in and 2 months later, they have to take this test. So these are some thoughts from them. English 3 is hard to write and speak because I know how to write, but not correctly. And speak is very hard too because I feel a strong class that I can't handle, even though I try, but not worth it. So here is this student saying, I'm not correct. I'm wrong. I can't compete with my peers. I can't. So here this student shut down. It's the next one. I feel good when I can, but bad when I can't. Again, this is the feeling they're leaving the classes with. These are classes I push into. I don't teach by myself. So I get some of the kids, but there's only 6 in our English language department. So sometimes students are out there and they get services in another area. So they're alone for this. But all along, they didn't have that opportunity to honor their voice. It's really hard sometimes because on biology class, the words are difficult to say. It's difficult because sometimes I don't understand anything, and we all feel that. For me, it's very difficult for me because I do not feel very well, but it's very nice to talk about it. It feels good. So this student loved the fact that I honored them by asking what they thought about their classes, and that simply made a doorway for us to communicate to. So now, looking at some examples that my students did, I want to tell you a few things about some of the students that are in this sample group. My students, the first year I came to the high school, it was a very different group. There were lots of 19-year-old students who hadn't had much education at all, were struggling. I did find I had 2 19-year-old students who were completely illiterate in their L1, and were really, really struggling, but continued to come to school every single day to get what they could. So you'll see in these examples from my students, the same piece you had, some students left lots of words. This student struggled with the directions a little bit. We went back, but they did find some other words they focused on. This student, I will tell you, was a young man, one of my students who knew a few words, but rarely spoke in class. He did not, but he could pick the words he knew. And that's, I sat beside him and we did it. I said, show me a word, point to a word you know. Living, peacefully, migrations, the United States. So when he reads the poem, here's the poem: living, peacefully, migrations, the United States, ancestors, Latinos continue, immigrate. Becomes very powerful when you just pick the words. This is another student, Wendy. Latinos, political immigrants, conditions, people, many. This young man is another one who struggled with school. Jose Rubio. Migrations, sometimes they have moved peacefully. Immigrants, Latinos, married, decided to stay. So this gets a chance to see into their background as well. But notice it's their voice. It's not mine. While the words were already given to them, they pick what words they want. So you'll see many of them have chosen bigger chunks or smaller chunks, but all of them have picked things that are familiar or they know. So this is an opportunity for their voice. And we put these out on, so we did the poem, we put them up, we displayed them. We go back and we reread them at other times, and we read each other's to notice the differences. Same piece of writing, but how vastly different the mood and the tone and the voice is, depending on the student who did it. So yes, I have a tremendous amount of black Sharpies in my room, or different cuts. Some of them wanted to use colors. That was fine too. So the next thing we did after we tried blackout poems for a while was we tried to do what's called mimic poetry, where we took a theme. In this case, it was a theme. It wasn't really the structure of the poem, but we took a theme from different books that I looked for. I Am of Two Places is a book of poetry that was written by a class of students, of ESOL students. Their pictures are in there as well. And Cool Salsa is bilingual poems specifically. So again, I'm trying to honor their heritage and honor their voices. And I did find some poetry by some different, a Vietnamese student. My lovely young girl from Puerto Rico and said, she was, don't worry, Miss Shane, I Hispanic is me. And then my Portuguese student said the same. It's so similar, Miss, don't worry. So if you can find multiple examples, that's what you want. But these two books are so powerful and have been so successful with my students feeling comfortable and wanting to share their voice. So what you have in the books, you have one called Divide. There are lots, but these are the students who wrote them. So every student is listed there. And then you have the general theme. So we started by reading a lot of these together. And we talked about, what do you notice? And we made a huge wall poster lists of what they noticed about each of the poems and what they saw. Um, and if you notice, it's very much their language. I feel like jelly in a sandwich. Imagine my father's country. And there's a lot, and I'm proud of my two languages, but sometimes I feel the Spanish speakers are on one mountain and the English speakers on another. And I wish I could push them into the river so we could all be together. So I had my students, we read it. Now these two students are really higher level. So they have stanzas because they already know some poetry. But here are some examples of very high. I am from two hobbies that don't combine basketball and band. I am from two places the other half may never know. As the light side runs free, the darkness sits in the back of my mind, fighting its opposite, constantly fighting for power between the dark and the light. One half is happy and cheerful and loves life. The other is depressed, anxious, and angry. And these are very strong examples. You're going to do I am of two places. You're going to do just like my students did. We created, after we read those examples, you can go back. You're going to create a list of your heritage, your personality traits, your hobbies, your family traits, your interests. Begin what is special about you and choose two things that seem to be in opposition, that are different, and write about what they mean to you. Don't worry about a poem. Don't worry about sentences. Just put your ideas down on paper. So when my students wrote them, these are some examples of my students, and they always had the original to look at to get an idea of what they wanted. So Pascual, Guatemala is my home country. I want to go visit, but we don't have a lot of money. When I'm at home, it's every different at home. I'm funny and like to meet and play music. I play around with my dad and mom. They get mad at me if get bad grade, but I try to get good grades. I get in trouble at home a lot of the time. At school, I play around in school. I try to finish my work. I get in trouble a lot. I always talk too much. Notice, it's not poetry style. It's not about style. It's not about the rules of poetry. It's about getting their voice out on paper. And in short phrases, it's more meaningful. I am from two places. He wasn't there when I was born. At least he knew I existed. Then came that day, 3 months after. He stood in front of me, but it didn't last long. It wasn't till I was 3 I saw him again. Now, 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m., time doesn't matter. He's there, busting his ass to provide everything I need, watching out for me, picking me up after every practice. He's my number one fan, and I'm afraid to lose him. So again, it was his heritage, it was his background, it was his dad, and the fact that they didn't have a relationship in the beginning and now they do. Do I let them write in cussing words in class? Absolutely. If I have students who need to write in their ELT1, that's fine. If I have students who need to, inner language, absolutely, it works. But they feel their voice is honored. So this one is one of my young ladies who struggled with writing, and she's a perfectionist. She loves to show what she can do and doesn't want to do it wrong. It took a while to get her comfortable to write this. So this is not the first one. We wrote this several days. I'm a girl that smiles no matter the problems she has. A girl who misses her family in El Salvador that are not here with her. The memories are sometimes sad when she remembers the good times she spent with them. My family is in another part, but I'm really sure someday I am gonna be with my family together again. And then you'll see on the right, this is a young student who is from China, whose cousin lived with him for a long time. He was born here. His cousin was born in China and came to live with his aunt and uncle, who were this young man's parents. But he talks about sometimes being alone is good. It doesn't make me lonely. So he I heads to turn, why can't I drown this out? I just don't know what this is about. Racism? No, it's just that I'm different. Sometimes I just wish I was like everyone else. So it gave them an opportunity to vent some feelings. So I want you to stop the presentation again, if you choose, and try an I am from two places. just a few lines. It doesn't have to be anything. It could be a paragraph. It doesn't matter. Emily started as a paragraph, and then we looked back at the poem, and I said, what do you notice about the two? And she said, oh, short. And I said, yeah. So she chopped things down to be a couple words. So if you pause and take a minute or two to do this activity. So as I was putting all this presentation together, I noticed that a lot of my examples were very strong. So I wanted to show you some newcomers or some reluctant writers, what they looked like, because they still were able to do the activity and they still got something out of it. So we started with a different one from Cool Salsa. And I wanted to show the reluctant writers what it looked like in Spanish, and then also what it looked like in English. And this was translated, but by someone else. So it was, they partnered up and had a friend help them, or a published author do it. Or this one from Lori Carlson, she took the poem and she translated it. So I said it was absolutely fine for that newcomer to write in their L1. And then we translated it, and he had both to practice from. So in this case, here are my two examples of that. Here's Kelvin. Kelvin, and his last name is admitted. He's got two. I am from two places, Guatemala and America. He's a very reluctant writer. Where I come from, it is hard. He changed it to impossible to get a job and food, and really poor and dirty. There are homeless people and dogs out in the street with no food and anything in America, where I was born at. Now we started from here. I'm from two places. I just started, I took what he wrote and I wrote it out here. And then I had him start telling me some things, and I scribed for him. So, and he gave me more words because I was scribing. So he got it. He just didn't want to put it. And so as we talked, we came up with something more. So the last thing we did, last activity I want to share with you, is really a true mimic poem. A true mimic poem is taking the structure and very much similar themed kind of chunks. So again, here I'm back to Jimmy Santiago Baca. Because I have a lot of students, a lot of boys, and a lot of boys who struggle every day with, do I quit and work, or do I stay and continue in school? And others, and even my girls, who feel like, I have to support my family. I'm paying the bills. I'm working till midnight every night. I'm, going through that. So this was a poem we shared, I Have Roads in Me, by Jimmy Santiago Baca. Winding within my arteries into distant hills of memories, where dreams float like dandelion fibers on bright, chill, breezy mornings under a canopy of cottonwood branches. We broke that down. We took time to think about what all of that imagery was. Where leaves glimmer, sunlight, roads turn. I have roads in me, where drums pound a sacrifice and beckon to again believe in life's wonder, where I learn the intense passion, seeing the sparkling dew-dripping leaves upon moist pine-needled ground, my heart restored. I am guided by stars and a raging desire to live. You can find YouTube videos where he reads it, and it's very powerful to kids to see him read it and hear his voice in it. So they use the title and the mood, and we talk about mood. I say, hey, your parents tell you that all the time. They say, you're in a mood. Don't use that tone with me. Don't use that mood with me. And I wanted them to compose at least two stanzas. And we talked, that's a chunk. One chunk talks about this. He talks about his body, his winding, his dreams. And then he talks about the other part of him, his other road. So I have a very short one, from a reluctant. So Patricia does not like poems. She does not like to write. She does not like to read. Basically, she's just your typical teenage, I just want to get done. So we started out, and I didn't care if it was a stanza or not. I wanted her to try. So these guys are level 2, 3. So you won't see a lot of L1. I do have some students who've done this, and we did it again, L1 and translated. So it says, my roads in 3 years, new experiences, fly around the world, my life with the friends, to go back to where I was born, perform any dreams. I like what I want to be in the future. My roads is going to take me to be policewoman. Walking into a big world, You see many opportunities in different places. My thoughts are always be in the right things, but it's not going to do what you think. This world and where you are has roads in where you need to choose the right roads. I have many roads in me where I have to be strong to shine in one of the roads I will go in the future. So here are my recommendations for you. Let students use writing to prepare for oral presentations. Let them write it all out, the whole thing. L1, mixed language, all of it. Use students' own or co-created writing for reading practice. Don't use a book, don't use baby books. Let them read their own words. The buy-in and the compellingness of it and the ownership of it, the pride comes through. For ELLs who are not literate in their native language, teach them as if they're learning their L1. Let them draw and label things. Let them work through. They can draw a picture for the language they use in their L1 only. They don't have to translate it yet. They can translate later. Follow print always as you read. I read, you read, we read, I read, all of us read. You heard that with Miss Carol Salva today. They learn to build their decoding skills and their sight vocabulary, and it's so powerful. And if it's their words, put them all over the wall. Adjust their instruction based on their writing. Use it to determine what they need in order to communicate with you. Communicate well and gradually introduce the skills. Don't do writing and grammar writing all the time. Prepare them to share their writing in class. Record it. Seesaw. Partners. Use any type of recording at all, even just for themselves. They can cover the video. I let them just read into it, but then they can hear themselves. And they do it a couple of times and they can hear how they change. So I show them their growth, but it's their words and their voice. Use students' own writing to compare and contrast linguistic features of their native language and their English. What's different? What do you notice? Why is English this way? Why is Spanish this way? Let them self-edit. Let them peer edit. Share their writing in class. Provide writing opportunities every day in all subjects, and advocate for that with your other teachers. So here are some of my students here. This is one of my Arabic students. He actually is Korean, but every time the students met him and he introduced himself, he would change which country he was from. So one time he said he was from Taiwan, another time he said he was Vietnam, another time he said he was Chinese. And it was a running joke all year because we got new students a lot. So every time we were waiting to see what he introduced himself as. And then I have another student who is from El Salvador there. So learning to write in a new language is a lifelong process of transformation because it involves not only learning a new set of language skills and vocabulary, but also constantly forming new ways of thinking and expressing yourself and creating divergent discourse, different discourse. How to express in a bi or a multilingual perspective. How do we share that with the world? Because our narratives are never going to be identical. Our narratives are going to be different. How can we honor those narratives and enrich our whole world around us to do that? If you have any questions at all, please email me at this address. I'm very grateful for my job, for the students I work with every day. I'm always looking for new ideas. These are just a few, but I am a strong believer in that they all have a voice and we need to honor that voice. Thank you.